Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of the countryside, where tall grasses swayed like soft waves and silver clouds drifted lazily across the sky, there stood an old farmhouse surrounded by fields and wildflowers. The air was gentle and calm, filled with the scent of rain and fresh earth. By the edge of a still pond, hidden between the reeds, a mother duck sat upon her nest. She had been waiting for many days, turning her eggs carefully beneath her wings. She whispered to them with love, "Be patient, my little ones. The world is waiting for you." One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the surface of the water, she heard a faint crack, then another. The nest began to move. Soon, small beaks poked through the shells, and one by one the eggs broke open. Tiny yellow ducklings stretched their wings and blinked at the morning sun. Their feathers glowed with warmth, and the mother duck's heart filled with joy. But one egg remained unbroken. It was larger than the rest, and a little rough to the touch. The mother duck tilted her head, puzzled. She waited. Hours passed, then days. Finally, on a quiet afternoon, the large egg began to tremble. The shell cracked and fell away, revealing a duckling unlike the others. He was bigger. His feathers were gray instead of yellow, and his neck was a little longer. He blinked, looked around shyly, and tried to smile. The mother duck looked at him softly. "Oh, you're not quite like the others," she said kindly. "But that's all right. You are still one of us." The gray duckling followed his brothers and sisters to the pond. He loved the feeling of water against his feathers. It was cool and comforting, and for a moment, he forgot that he looked different. He swam in slow circles, happy just to belong. But the other ducklings didn't see it that way. They whispered and laughed. "Look at him. He's so strange. Why is he so big? His feathers are so dull." The gray duckling tried to ignore them, but their words stuck to him like thorns. Everywhere he went, others stared. Even the farm animals whispered. The chickens clucked, and the turkeys gobbled with laughter whenever he passed by. He tried to play, to be kind, to fit in, but nothing seemed to help. When he looked at his reflection in the pond, he saw only a strange, lonely face staring back. As days passed, he began to wander away from the others. He liked the quiet places near the tall reeds, where the air was cool and the water rippled softly. There, he could be alone with his thoughts. He watched dragonflies hover above the pond and listened to the wind move through the grass. The quiet made him feel safe. At night, he looked up at the stars. Their light shimmered on the water like tiny lanterns. He wondered what it would be like to shine like that, to be something beautiful instead of something strange. Sometimes, when he couldn't sleep, he would whisper to the night, "Why am I so different? Why doesn't anyone like me?" But the night never answered. One evening, the mother duck came to sit beside him. Her feathers glowed softly in the fading light. "My dear child," she said gently, "you are different, that is true. But different does not mean wrong. Sometimes what others cannot see right away takes time to show its beauty. You must be patient with yourself." The little gray duckling nodded. But he didn't truly understand. Deep down, his heart still ached. The world around him seemed full of colors and laughter that he could never reach. The days grew shorter, and the air became cooler. The once bright pond was now quiet and gray. The duckling watched the other birds fly above the water in the graceful flocks, their wings flashing white against the pale sky. He wished he could fly too, far away from the laughter, far away from the pain. One morning, the wind blew stronger than before. The duckling decided to wander beyond the farm. He walked through the reeds, past the meadow, and into the world beyond. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay. The grass brushed softly against his feathers as he moved. The ground was damp and cool beneath his feet. Every step took him farther from the only home he had ever known. But in his heart there was a small spark of hope, the hope that somewhere out there he might find a place where he belonged. As the sun set and the sky turned golden, he stopped by a small stream. The water was clear, and the trees whispered quietly in the wind. He looked at his reflection once more. The same gray feathers, the same awkward shape. But now there was something new in his eyes, a quiet determination. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he had to keep going. The world was wide, and somewhere within it, he believed there must be a place where even a strange little duckling like him could be loved. That night, he found a patch of grass and curled up beneath the stars. The world was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves. As he closed his eyes, the cool air wrapped around him like a gentle blanket. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel afraid. He simply drifted into sleep, dreaming of lakes, sunlight, and wings he had never yet learned to use. The morning came quietly, wrapped in a soft gray mist that covered the fields like a dream. The little gray duckling woke with a chill running through his feathers. The world felt big, too big, and he was only a small, lonely creature walking through it. The farmhouse was far behind him now. The voices that once mocked him had faded into silence. Ahead lay meadows and winding streams, forests of whispering trees, and hidden ponds glimmering like pieces of sky fallen to the earth. He began to walk. The ground was damp with dew, and every blade of grass brushed against his legs. He listened to the soft sounds of nature, the hum of insects, the rustle of wind, the quiet rhythm of his own steps. At first, the journey felt peaceful. The duckling was free. No one laughed. No one stared. He could move wherever he pleased, follow any path. But as the day grew warmer, his stomach began to ache with hunger. He pecked at small seeds and leaves, but they gave him little strength. By afternoon, the clouds began to gather. A shadow spread over the fields, and the air grew heavy. The first drops of rain touched his feathers, cool and sharp. He looked around, searching for shelter, and saw a small bush near a lonely tree. He hurried beneath it just as the sky opened. The rain fell in long silver lines, steady and endless. The wind rose, bending the grass and stirring the pond nearby. The duckling curled himself tightly, trembling. For a long time, he watched the rain and tried not to cry. He didn't know where he was going anymore. He only knew he had to keep moving forward, even if he didn't know why. When the storm finally passed, the world was quiet again. Drops clung to every leaf, and the air smelled clean and new. Slowly, he stepped out from beneath the bush. His feathers were wet and heavy, but his heart was lighter. The storm had not broken him. He was still here. He wandered until he found a small pond surrounded by willows. The water shimmered softly, and frogs croaked in the distance. It looked peaceful, so he decided to stay for a while. There were other ducks there, bright and beautiful, their feathers smooth and shining. They looked at him curiously as he approached. "Who are you?" one of them asked. The gray duckling lowered his head. "I'm just passing through," he said quietly. The ducks whispered among themselves. One of them laughed. "You don't look like any duck I've seen before." The duckling felt his heart sink. He tried to swim away from them, but their laughter followed him like an echo. He found a quiet corner of the pond and stayed there until the sun began to set. That night, as the stars appeared, he looked at his reflection once again. The moonlight made the water shimmer like glass. His gray feathers seemed even duller beneath the silver glow. He closed his eyes and wished, not for beauty, but simply for kindness. The next morning, he decided to leave. He was tired of being stared at, tired of feeling like a mistake. He wanted to find a place where no one would look at him with pity or laughter. He walked for many days. He crossed meadows filled with tall yellow flowers. He followed rivers that wound through quiet woods, and he slept under bushes and trees. Sometimes he found crumbs of food near small cottages, and sometimes he went hungry. One evening, as he wandered through a field of tall grass, he saw a farmhouse in the distance. He was cold and tired, so he crept closer, hoping to find shelter. The door of a barn was slightly open, and he slipped inside. It was warm and dark. There was hay piled in a corner, and the soft sound of a cat purring nearby. A hen sat on a wooden beam, and when she saw him, she tilted her head. "Who are you?" asked the hen. "I'm a duckling," he said softly. "I'm just looking for a place to stay for a while." The hen looked doubtful. "You don't look much like a duckling," she said, "but if you stay quiet and don't make trouble, you can stay." For a few days, the gray duckling stayed in the barn. He was grateful for the warmth and for a place to rest. The cat, however, didn't like him. The cat would stretch lazily and say, "What good are you? You don't purr, you don't catch mice, you're just useless." The hen wasn't much kinder. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked one morning. "No," said the duckling quietly. "Then you have no purpose," said the hen. "You should be more like us." The duckling sighed. "I just want to float on the water," he said. "To feel the pond around me and watch the sky." The hen laughed. "That's nonsense. If you had something better to do, you wouldn't think about such silly things." So the duckling stayed silent. After a while, the barn that had felt warm began to feel like a cage. He longed for the open air, for the sound of the wind, for freedom. One morning, before the others woke, he slipped out of the barn and walked toward the fields again. The air was cool and smelled of autumn. Leaves had begun to fall, painting the ground with gold and brown. He walked until he reached a wide lake surrounded by reeds. The water sparkled in the sunlight. He stepped into it slowly, and for the first time in many days, he felt at peace. For hours he swam in slow circles, letting the water carry him. Above him, birds flew in great flocks, their wings white and strong. He watched them rise higher and higher, their calls echoing across the sky. Something stirred deep within him, a longing he couldn't explain. They were so beautiful, those birds, graceful and free. He had never seen creatures like them before. He wanted to follow them, to fly with them, to be part of their world. But he was only a little gray duckling, awkward and weak. He watched until they disappeared beyond the clouds. Then he lowered his head and whispered to himself, "Someday, Maybe someday. The days grew shorter, and the air turned colder. Frost touched the edges of the pond, and the reeds turned brown. The duckling built a small nest among them to keep warm, but the nights were long and bitter. He missed the warmth of the farmhouse, even the noise of the barn. Sometimes he dreamed of the white birds he had seen flying in the sky. In his dreams he flew beside them, his wings strong and sure. He felt the wind beneath him and the sunlight on his feathers. But when he woke, he was still the same gray duckling, shivering beside the frozen pond. Winter was coming, and he did not know if he would survive it. Yet somewhere deep inside, that small spark of hope still lived. He didn't know why. He didn't know how. But something in his heart whispered that his story was not over yet. The days grew shorter, and the sky turned pale and heavy. The warmth of summer was only a memory now, hidden beneath the cold breath of winter. Frost crept across the grass each morning, turning the fields into silver seas that shimmered in the early light. The little gray duckling wandered alone. His feathers were thin, and his body trembled in the cold wind. The ponds he had loved so much were no longer soft and welcoming. They were frozen over, their surfaces hard and still, trapping reflections of a distant sun. He pecked at the ice, hoping to find water beneath, but it was no use. Hunger gnawed at him, and loneliness pressed against his heart like the cold itself. Still, he did not stop moving. Something inside him, something small and stubborn, kept him walking forward. Sometimes he found shelter beneath bushes or hollow logs. Sometimes he rested in the snow, curling himself tightly so the wind could not steal all his warmth. The nights were the hardest. The stars looked close enough to touch, yet they gave no warmth. He often thought of his mother and the soft warmth of her feathers. He thought of the pond where he had first swum, and how kind her voice had been. He wondered if she still remembered him, or if she believed he was gone forever. One evening, as the light faded, he came upon a small cottage. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and the windows glowed with golden light. He hesitated, afraid of what might wait inside, but the cold was too much. He crept closer, hoping for a little warmth. The door was slightly open, and he slipped through the gap. Inside, it was warm and dim. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a kind old woman sat by the flames. A cat lay curled beside her chair, and a hen pecked at crumbs on the floor. The woman noticed him and smiled softly. "Oh, a duckling," she said in a gentle voice. "You poor thing. You must be freezing." She scooped him up carefully and placed him near the fire. For the first time in weeks, the duckling felt warmth again. The heat soaked through his feathers, and he sighed with relief. He closed his eyes, thinking that perhaps he had finally found a safe place. But peace never stayed with him for long. The cat eyed him suspiciously, its green eyes narrow. The hen clucked impatiently whenever he moved. "What good are you?" asked the hen one morning. "You can't lay eggs, you can't purr, you just sit there." "I like the water," said the duckling softly. "I like to swim." "Swim," the hen scoffed. "What kind of foolish thing is that? Stay here where it's warm. You'll only get yourself in trouble out there." The cat stretched lazily. "You should learn to do something useful," it said, "like catching mice." The duckling lowered his head. "I don't want to catch mice," he whispered. "I just want to be free." The hen and cat laughed. "Free? they said together. What nonsense! After that, they ignored him. The duckling stayed quiet, keeping to himself. But each day the longing in his heart grew stronger. He missed the open sky, the whispering reeds, the feel of water against his feathers. One morning, while the woman was sweeping the floor and the others were busy eating crumbs, he slipped out through the door and ran into the snow. The cold struck him like a wall, but his heart felt lighter. He was free again. The world was silent and white. Trees stood bare and still, their branches heavy with frost. The wind moved softly through them, making a sound like sighing. The duckling walked across frozen fields and over hills covered in snow. Sometimes he rested near the edges of frozen ponds, staring down at the smooth glass of ice that mirrored the gray sky. He felt like he was looking into another world, one just as cold and lonely as his own. Days turned into weeks. Snow fell again and again, layering the earth in silence. The duckling grew weaker. His small body was thin, and his wings trembled with each step. He wondered if he would live to see another spring. One night, as he wandered beneath a sky filled with stars, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Above the trees, flying in graceful lines, were the same white birds he had seen before, the ones that had stirred something deep inside him months ago. Their feathers glowed in the moonlight, and their cries echoed through the cold air. They were swans, though he did not know their name. To him, they were the most beautiful creatures in the world. He watched them with tears in his eyes. Something inside him ached, not with sadness, but with longing. He wanted to follow them, to call out to them, to be near them. He stretched his wings as far as he could, but he could not lift himself from the ground. Still, he watched until they disappeared into the distance. The world felt even quieter once they were gone. After that night, he dreamed of them often. When he closed his eyes, he could see them gliding across the sky, free and bright. In those dreams, he felt the wind beneath his wings, and for a moment he forgot the cold. Winter was long and cruel. There were days when the duckling thought he could not go on, but each morning, when he opened his eyes, he kept walking. Something unseen carried him forward, the faint promise of warmth, the whisper of a new beginning. And then, one day, the sun began to feel different. It shone a little brighter, and the wind lost some of its bite. The snow began to melt, dripping softly from the trees. Tiny green shoots pushed through the earth, and the world seemed to breathe again. The duckling could hardly believe it. He stood beside a pond that was slowly thawing and watched as patches of water appeared among the ice. He stepped forward carefully and felt the cool touch of water on his feet for the first time in months. He let out a small sigh of joy. The ice was breaking, the world was waking, and something inside him stirred, something that had slept all through the long, bitter winter. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet hope growing inside him. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the pond. The wind carried the scent of spring. The gray duckling closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He had survived the winter. And deep within his heart, he knew that something beautiful was waiting ahead. The earth sighed as winter loosened its grip. The ice cracked and shimmered beneath the returning sun, melting into tiny streams that whispered through the grass. The air was cool but gentle now, scented with wet soil and new leaves. The little gray duckling awoke one morning to the sound of running water. He lifted his head and listened. It was a soft, living sound, full of movement and life, so different from the still silence of winter. He rose slowly, his legs trembling, and waddled toward the pond. The ice had melted almost completely. Clear water rippled before him, sparkling like glass. For a long while, he simply stood there, watching it move. Then, hesitantly, he stepped in. The water embraced him. It was cold, but it didn't bite. It flowed around him with gentle hands, as if welcoming him home. He began to swim, clumsily at first, then with growing strength. His heart lifted. The simple act of gliding through the pond felt like a song his body had been waiting to sing. He tilted his head toward the sky. It was blue again, wide and bright, and birds were flying overhead. Their wings cut across the air like strokes of light. He watched them with awe, feeling a quiet stirring deep inside him. He didn't understand what it was, only that it made his chest ache in a way that was both sweet and sad. Days passed gently. Grass grew thick and green around the pond. The air filled with the hum of insects, the murmur of frogs, the music of the living world. For the first time in his life, the duckling began to feel peace. He found joy in small things, in the silver trail of a snail on a rock, in the shimmer of sunlight through leaves, in the way the ripples moved when he swam. Still, there was a loneliness in him, a soft, unspoken longing that no sound could fill. Sometimes he caught glimpses of other ducks on nearby ponds. They were bright and lively, their feathers smooth and colorful. He would hide among the reeds, watching them laugh and play, but he never dared to join. He was still the strange one, the outcast, the one who didn't belong. But the world around him didn't seem to care. The sun warmed him. The breeze touched him kindly. The reeds swayed beside him as though whispering secrets of patience and time. And time did pass. The duckling grew larger. His wings grew stronger, his feathers thicker. Yet he didn't notice the change in himself. He still thought of his reflection as something plain and awkward, not worth looking at for long. One morning, after a long swim, he came upon a clear stretch of water beneath a willow tree. The surface was smooth as glass. When he bent to drink, he paused. Something shimmered in the water, a reflection, delicate and white. For a moment, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved as he did. He blinked. The creature in the water was not gray or awkward. Its feathers gleamed white as snow. Its neck was long and elegant, its wings strong and graceful. Its eyes shone like dark jewels. He stepped back in shock. He turned his head, his body, his wings, and the reflection followed. Could it be? He looked again, hardly daring to breathe. The truth unfolded slowly, like a blossom opening beneath the morning sun. He was not the ugly duckling anymore. He was one of them. He was a swan. For a long moment, he could not move. The realization filled him with wonder and fear. Could this be real? Was it possible that after all his suffering, after all his wandering, this was who he had been all along? He spread his wings, testing them. The sunlight caught them, and they glowed like silver. A breeze passed over the pond, and something inside him lifted. Without thinking, he leapt forward, and for the first time in his life, he flew. The world fell away beneath him. The pond, the reeds, the earth, they blurred into a swirl of green and gold. The air rushed past his wings, cool and soft, and his heart soared with it. He rose higher and higher until the ground was only a memory. The sky opened around him, vast and endless. He felt weightless, as if he had always been meant for this. The feeling was unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't just joy, it was freedom, pure and deep, like the sound of 1,000 songs sung at once. And then he heard them, voices in the distance, soft, familiar cries. He turned his head and saw them, a flock of swans gliding through the sky, their white wings gleaming in the sunlight. They were the same ones he had seen before, long ago in the autumn skies, the ones he had dreamed of through the bitter winter. For a moment, he hesitated. Fear trembled in his chest. What if they turned him away, just as everyone else had? What if they saw him as something unworthy? But the longing in his heart was stronger than his fear. He angled his wings and flew toward them. As he approached, the swans turned their heads and called out softly. Their voices were warm, welcoming. When he drew close, they formed a circle around him, graceful and calm. He floated among them, silent and trembling. He felt their eyes on him, not mocking, not cruel, but kind. One of them swam closer and brushed its beak gently against his feathers. The gesture was simple, but it was everything. He belonged. The realization was too much to bear. He lowered his head, tears gathering in his eyes, and whispered to himself, "I never knew I could be this." The other swans glided beside him, their movements smooth as drifting clouds. Together, they flew low over the water, their reflections rippling below. When they landed on a wide, shining lake surrounded by trees in bloom, the air was filled with birdsong and the scent of spring. The young swan looked down at his reflection one more time. His heart felt light and full. All the pain, the loneliness, the hunger, it had all led him here. The other swans spread their wings and he followed. They moved as one, gliding across the lake, leaving soft trails of silver light behind them. Children standing by the shore clapped their hands in delight. "Look," one of them cried, "the most beautiful swan of all." The young swan heard them, but did not lift his head in pride. He only smiled quietly to himself. He knew what it had taken to reach this moment. He knew what it meant to be alone, to be cold, to be unloved, and he knew now what it meant to be free. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. The lake shimmered beneath it, and the swans drifted across its glowing surface like living dreams. At last, the young swan felt peace. Not the fragile kind that vanishes with fear, but the deep, steady calm that comes from knowing who you truly are. The evening air grew soft, and the world slowed to a gentle stillness. He tucked his head beneath his wing, floating among his new companions, surrounded by warmth and light. And, as the first stars appeared in the sky, the ugly duckling, who was never truly ugly at all, fell into the sweetest sleep of his life. The night had settled gently over the lake. The air was soft and cool, carrying the faint scent of blossoms and water. The moon rose slowly above the trees, casting a silver glow across the quiet world. The swans slept on the surface of the water, their reflections trembling faintly with each ripple. Among them floated the youngest, the one who had once been the ugly duckling. He stirred softly in his sleep, the breeze moving through his feathers like a whisper. For the first time in his life, his dreams were peaceful. No chasing, no laughter, No cold winds or empty skies, only light and the endless sound of calm water. When morning came, he awoke to the sound of wings. The other swans were already gliding across the lake, their white forms gleaming beneath the early sun. He rose to join them, and together they took flight, their movements slow and graceful, like petals drifting upward. The world below shimmered with dew. The trees reached toward the sky, their branches heavy with new leaves. The swan looked down at the place where he had once hidden in fear, where he had walked through snow and hunger and loneliness. It felt like a dream now, distant and small, as if it had happened to someone else. Yet he carried it all with him, the cold, the pain, the yearning. They were part of his wings now. Without them, he would never have learned to fly. He understood, at last, that beauty was not given. It was found, slowly, quietly, through endurance and hope. The lake beneath them spread wide and bright, alive with light. Ripples caught the sunlight and scattered it in 1,000 tiny sparks. The swans landed one by one, their wings folding like white silk. The young one followed, feeling the water rise around him, gentle and cool. He looked at his reflection again. The sight no longer startled him. It felt like seeing an old friend. He smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Children sometimes came to the lake to watch the swans. They brought crumbs of bread and laughter. When they saw him, they always pointed and smiled. "That one," they would say. "That one is the most beautiful of all." He would tilt his head, the sunlight glinting on his feathers, and glide a little closer. The children would laugh, reaching out their hands toward him, their eyes wide with wonder. He liked their laughter. It was kind, untainted by cruelty. It reminded him of something pure, the sound of beginnings. But he never stayed near for long. The open water called to him, wide and bright, and he would drift back to the others, to the quiet rhythm of their graceful world. Seasons passed. The reeds grew tall, then golden. Leaves fell, snow came and melted again. The young swan grew stronger, his wings broad and powerful. Yet, no matter how much time passed, he never forgot what it had felt like to be small and unwanted. He would sometimes wander alone, gliding to the far edges of the lake where the forest leaned close to the water. There, he would rest among the shadows, listening to the murmur of wind through the trees. He often thought of the duck yard where he had been born. He remembered the jeers, the sharp words, the frightened eyes that had turned away from him. But now, when he thought of those days, there was no bitterness, only understanding. They had seen what they could see. They hadn't known what he would become, and maybe, he thought, they had been frightened by what they couldn't understand. That was the way of the world sometimes. Fear first, then distance, then silence. But he had learned something greater, that the truth of what we are is not always visible. Sometimes it takes time, patience, and the courage to keep living through the cold. And so he forgave them, quietly, completely. One twilight, when the world was brushed in silver and blue, he flew high above the lake. The air was cool and clean, the horizon soft with mist. Below, he saw the reflection of the sky rippling across the water. For a moment, he hovered there, suspended between earth and heaven, between what he had been and what he had become. And in that stillness, he understood that his story had never truly been about ugliness or beauty. It had been about becoming, about survival and faith, and the small stubborn hope that lives even in the coldest winter. That hope was what had carried him through the darkness. It was the quiet flame that had kept him moving forward, one trembling step at a time. He thought of all those who might still be wandering somewhere, alone, misunderstood, believing themselves unworthy of love or light. His heart ached for them, but also held a quiet promise. Someday, they too would find their wings. He tilted his head toward the setting sun. The sky burned gold and pink, its colors melting into the water below. He spread his wings and soared into the fading light. The wind brushed past him, warm and soft. The world glowed beneath him, full of sound and scent and motion. The lake shimmered like a mirror of the heavens, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was escaping the earth. He felt like he was becoming part of it, woven into its breath, its light, its endless rhythm of change. He flew until the stars appeared, one by one, across the darkening sky. Then he circled down to the lake, where the other swans waited, their white forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. He settled beside them, folding his wings. The night was calm, the world quiet and vast. The water rocked him gently like a cradle. He breathed in the cool air, his heart steady, his mind at rest. Once, long ago, he had been a lonely gray duckling, lost and afraid. Now he was a swan, strong, graceful, and free. And though he had flown far from his past, he carried it within him like a memory of roots, deep and invisible beneath the surface. It was not something to be ashamed of, but something to cherish, for it had shaped the wings that now held him aloft. He closed his eyes as the moonlight drifted across the lake. The ripples slowed, the sounds of night deepened into stillness, and in that gentle silence, the story of the ugly duckling came to rest, not as a tale of sorrow, but as a song of transformation, a song for anyone who has ever felt out of place, a whisper for anyone still waiting for their spring, a promise that even in the longest winter, something beautiful is growing in secret. The lake glimmered softly, and the wind carried a single white feather across the water. It drifted for a while, caught in the silver light, then vanished into the dark, free and shining, just like him.